Okay, so this mini lesson is going to cover summary in kind of a broad stroke. We're going to talk about how to summarize, and then we're going to conclude this mini lesson with a quick look at how you can organize a summary paper. So the first question is, what is summary? Now, if we use it like a noun, it's a brief statement or account of the main points of something or the gist. Now, you can also define this as a verb, as in, can you please summarize this text? One way is an action that we do, and here the noun is a thing that we create. We're going to talk about both definitions in this mini lesson. So the first way we're going to think about summary is in that verb sense of, can you summarize this text? And so in that way, I'm going to talk about the steps of summary, and then we'll talk about the summary paper. So first steps that you want to take before you write anything down for the paper is, the first step is you need to read the text. Haha. But seriously, make sure you know what the text is saying and that you understand what it means. This might take several steps for you, and it might be really easy and you'll get it on the first try. Specifically, as you're reading and annotating the text, the main thing, the key that you want to be looking for is, what is the main point or argument of the text? What is the author trying to say at the bottom line? Next steps to take before you even start writing your paper is that you want to look at the key evidence that supports the main point that you just identified. This is how the main point is being made. What are the reasons that the writer is pointing to that support their argument? It's also helpful to examine elements of context, such as why this might be important or who this argument or main point might affect. All of these steps, reading, annotating, identifying the main point, identifying the key evidence, identifying the context elements, you can do without writing the paper at all. These are like the act of summarizing. Then you get down to actually writing it. So I always recommend, for the actual act of writing a summary, is, review your notes, look at the annotations that you just made, then flip them over, tuck them away. Have a blank screen in front of you or a blank page and write down everything you can think of in one big free write. Like, I'm going to write for 10 minutes and say everything that I can remember. If you're working on a really tight word count, for example, if a teacher has assigned you a 200 or 20 word summary, you can do this free write and then kind of go back to it and cut it down. Like here on this image of the incredible shrinking notes, you could write a big pink chunk and then cut out all the warm-up words, anything that's meaningless. See how you can, this is actually kind of a fun game to play. See how you can say the same thing in many, many fewer words. Repeat as needed for the length of your summary. Now, for you guys in this class, you're writing a whole paper. And so a lot of you might be thinking, my problem is not getting it shorter, or my problem is going to be getting it long enough. Well, really, what we're going to see in this class is that long enough just means addressing the prompts and doing the work that the genre is supposed to be doing. So here, what it's supposed to be doing is identifying the main point of the piece. You start with your introduction. You're going to introduce all that up front. Introduce the title of the piece, the author of the piece, and the central argument or point within your first paragraph of your summary paper. So for example, here's an intro paragraph for a summary. In his article, Don't Blame the Eater, David Zinchenko blames the fast food industry for fueling today's so-called obesity epidemic, not only by failing to provide adequate warning labels on its high-calorie foods, but also filling the nutritional void in children's lives left by their overtaxed working parents. So right here we have introducing the title of the piece, the author, and the main point, which is that the author, Zinchenko, is blaming the fast food industry for the obesity epidemic. In your intro, you also want to map out what your points of evidence are going to be. For example, how is the author making this main argument that you've just identified? In this same paragraph that we just looked at, we can identify the key points that are going to be talked about right after the main point, right? So we said that Zinchenko blames the fast food industry for fueling today's so-called obesity epidemic. That's the main argument. How does Zinchenko do it? Well, first, he's pointing to the fast food industry's failure to provide adequate warning labels. So that's one point. So this is how the fast food industry is fueling the obesity epidemic. And also by filling the nutritional void in children's lives by their overtaxed working parents. So those are two different points of evidence: lack of nutrition labels and marketing to children. In a summary paper, some people might find it helpful to have an outline. Some people might not. If you're one of those people who kind of throws up in your mouth a little bit when I mention an outline, feel free to fast forward this point. But it can be really helpful to know what your basic organizational structure is going to be. So it's going to have an introduction. It's going to have a closing paragraph. And these paragraphs should work together to create bookends. An introduction and then the conclusion should mirror that introduction by restating at least that main sentence and maybe even some of those key points from the mapping sentence. Each body paragraph should have one and only one key point in it. A paragraph is a chunk of text that communicates a single idea. So you would want a lead-in sentence, a quote or paraphrase sandwich, or a couple of them, and a lead-out sentence to make one point. That's a paragraph, and then you would repeat that with as many body paragraphs as you need. Okay, let's talk about the quote sandwich, because some of you might have known what I was talking about just then, and some of you might have been like, is it lunchtime? So here we are. We have an example here of a couple different sandwiches. One is a quote sandwich, one's a paragraph sandwich, but they're both in a single paragraph. So up here you can see, since many parents work long hours and are unable to supervise what their children eat, Zinchenko claims that children today are easily victimized by the low-cost, calorie-laden food that fast food chains are all too eager to supply. Here we have a little citation. So this whole sentence is a paraphrase from the text. And this is a real important lesson for me to teach you. Always cite your paraphrases. Even if you're putting it in your own words, if it's information that did not come from your brain, if it came from the text, you need to cite it. And this is a nice example of how to do that. Well, now we're going to get into the quote sandwich. When he was a boy, for instance, and his single mother was away at work, he ate at Taco Bell, McDonald's, and other chains on a regular basis and ended up overweight. So this sentence is another bit of paraphrase, but it's leading into what the actual quote's going to be. And then we have this nice signal phrase right here. Zinchenko argues that. So the name of the author, we always name the author with their last name, not their first name, because you know, friends, just use their last name or their full name. A signal verb argues, states, maintains, confirms, and then we put the quote in. This is like the meat of your sandwich. With customer awareness and maybe even lawsuits against the fast food industry, other children with working parents will have healthier choices available to them. End quote. Here's our citation, and period goes outside. Then we have the bottom piece of bread of the sandwich. Zinchenko's experience as a child influenced him as an advocate today and fuel his passionate arguments about fast food. So here we start with the lead-in sentence, the top piece of bread, little bit of lettuce and tomato here, leading into the meat, which is the quote itself, and then that bottom piece of bread, the lead out quote, sentence. So here's some templates for introducing summaries and quotations. If you want to take a second to jot these down, these can be really helpful places to start, like little seedlings that you can branch off of. The author advocates, or fill that in with whatever signal verb seems best to you. There's a list of signal verbs at the end of this mini lesson. The author celebrates the fact that, although there are many arguments for this policy, blank, what's the thing that's against this policy? The author admits or maintains. He or she contends that. These are all just giving you examples of sentence structures. You don't have to use them word for word, but you might want to try them out. Like, what would happen if you used these templates and plugged and chugged information from the text that we're studying for this summary? It might get you going on some really strong paragraphs. And like I said, verbs to use in summaries can really just, there's such a rich, and you could go to the dictionary and just, swim around for a little bit in different kinds of verbs that you could use to introduce statements or quotes. But I've put a few here just to kind of get us out from the trap that sometimes we get sucked into, that everything states. She states, the author states, the author stated, or said. Either one, like, those are fine if you can't think of literally anything else, but look at how many other verbs there are to use. The author argues, she asserts, many believe, the author claims, right? There's just so many different words that can help enrich the structure of your sentences. They can be positive, they can advocate, call for, demand, encourage. They can be negative, they can warn. Check it out. There's lots of, even if you just did a quick Google search of signal verbs or verbs to use in summaries or whatever, you could come up with some pretty cool lists to work from. All right, so I think that should be enough to get you started as you think about both the act of summary, making sure you can condense a reading into its gist, and then the writing of the summary paper, which we went over super briefly here. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and we'll just get started on our summary.